So, next video, things to consider before signing. Um, it's important to note here whether you're going to a club which is in the top of their league or the bottom of their league. I mean, even in some of the more competitive leagues, there's a huge difference between the top teams and the bottom teams. So make sure you reach out to us so that we can tell you more about which team reached out to you and how they compete within their league.
It's also important to have an understanding of the city that you're going to be living in, whether it's a small city or a big city. That can have an effect on your overall experience as well. Small town clubs tend to have more of a baseball community and more support from the community, and actually sometimes have more fans, believe it or not, because there aren't competing sports in that town. So sometimes baseball actually, even in an obscure place like Austria, where we are here, if you're in a small town club, suddenly like you might be the team in that town. Whereas if you're in a bigger city, your team and your sport might get lost amongst all the other noise and all the different sports. And then within the community aspect and the team culture, there's also differences between small town and big town. Now it's not always that way, but this is the general rule of thumb. In the small town club, often after the home games and everything, everybody will hang out and have some beers after, and there's a lot of team bonding, where often what you hear is in the bigger city teams, they tend to go their separate ways after the game.
And another thing to consider would be the cost of living with whichever country that you're going to. Because if you go to the Czech Republic, the US dollar goes a long way compared to if you go to Switzerland, where the conversion rate necessarily doesn't go in your favor.
Team demographics is another thing that often is overlooked. And if you're going to go somewhere and commit to a team for an extended period of time, it's good to know, like, all right, am I the only import? Like, sometimes that happens. Most teams bring more than one import, but if you're the only import, then you're kind of hanging out with yourself. There's a lot of downtime between games because they play on weekends for the most part. The question is all right, are there guys on the team that are my age that, have time to hang out or whatever, so that you're not completely alone all the time? So that's something to consider, unless you're somebody that's very comfortable just doing their own thing.
Then the last thing to touch on is your visa before you go over. Like if you go to Australia or New Zealand, you can easily apply for a work and holiday visa. If you're under 30, it's super easy. You just pay for a work and holiday visa. It takes maybe a day, maybe like a week or two max to get approved for it, or at least to get a response. But if you go to Europe, it might get a little bit more complicated because there's a 90-day visitor's visa. And this is where you have to communicate with your club to see what your options are. There are a lot of clubs who can bring you over on a coaching visa, which allows you to live and work for as long as you are coaching with that team. But if that's not the case, you can get your visa extended. You have to be clear with the club on how to do that. Or there's also student visas where you can apply and say like a language class, which might be a good idea anyways. But this is something that you should clear up with your team before you go over there, of which visa options you have.